Amelia's life was woven from the simple joys and sorrows of village life. Raised by her grandmother, whom she affectionately called Nana, Amelia's earliest memories were filled with warmth, love, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafting through their small cottage. The cottage, nestled at the edge of the village, was a modest structure with weathered wooden beams and a thatched roof, surrounded by a garden that bloomed with vibrant flowers in the summer and yielded vegetables in the fall. It was far from grand, but to Amelia, it was the most beautiful place in the world. Nana was Amelia's entire world. She was a kind woman with silver hair tied into a neat bun, her face etched with the lines of a life well lived. Her hands were always busy, whether knitting by the fire in the winter or tending to the garden in the spring. But no matter how busy she was, she always had time for Amelia. She told stories of the old days, of Amelia's parents, and of the village, filling her granddaughter's heart with wonder and curiosity. Amelia knew little of her parents. Nana had told her that they had died in a tragic accident when she was just a baby. Though she often wondered about them, she never felt their absence too deeply because Nana's love filled every corner of her life. From an early age, Amelia learned the values of hard work and kindness. She helped Nana with the chores, sweeping the floors, fetching water from the well, and tending to the animals. The villagers admired her for her diligence and sweet nature, and she became a beloved figure in the community. Among the villagers, there was one person who held a special place in Amelia's life: Liam, her childhood friend. Liam was the son of the blacksmith who lived next door. He was a few years older than Amelia, with a sturdy build, tousled brown hair, and eyes that sparkled with mischief. They had grown up together, inseparable from the time they were old enough to walk. Whether climbing trees, chasing each other through the fields, or helping with the harvest, Liam was always by her side. As they grew older, Liam's feelings for Amelia deepened. He admired her strength, her kindness, and her unwavering dedication to her grandmother. To him, she was more than just a friend. She was the girl he loved. However, Amelia saw him differently. To her, Liam was like an older brother, someone she could always rely on, but nothing more. She loved him dearly, but it was a love born of friendship and trust, not of romance. Amelia's heart belonged to someone else, Jacob, the son of the wealthiest man in the village. Jacob was tall, with dark hair and striking blue eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. They had met at a village fair one summer evening. Amelia had been helping with the food stalls when Jacob approached, drawn by her laughter and the kindness in her eyes. From that moment, they were inseparable, spending every possible moment together, though always in secret. Jacob's family was well known in the village, not just for their wealth but for their pride. His father, Mr. Whitmore, was a stern man who believed in maintaining social distinctions. He expected Jacob to marry someone of their own standing, not a poor village girl. But Jacob had fallen for Amelia's pure heart, her intelligence, and her beauty. Their love was a secret, a precious thing they kept hidden from the world. They met in secluded spots, in the meadows by the river, and sometimes late at night, under the cover of darkness. Despite the secrecy, Amelia was happier than she had ever been. Jacob spoke of a future where they could be together without fear, but both knew it was a distant dream. For now, they lived in the moment, cherishing their stolen moments of happiness. However, the weight of their secret began to take its toll on Amelia. She longed to be able to walk through the village hand in hand with Jacob, to share their love openly. But Jacob was terrified of his father's wrath and what it might mean for their future. As the months passed, Amelia noticed changes in her body. She felt more tired than usual, her appetite increased, and soon, she missed her monthly cycle. Fear and excitement churned within her as she suspected what might be happening. One morning, after the sun had barely risen, she made her way to the village herbalist, an elderly woman with a deep knowledge of plants and medicines. After a brief examination, the herbalist confirmed what Amelia had both hoped for and feared. She was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of emotions. She was thrilled at the idea of bringing a new life into the world, a child created out of her love for Jacob. But the reality of their situation quickly set in. How could they raise a child in secret? How would Jacob's parents react? Despite her fears, Amelia decided to tell Jacob. She knew they needed to face this together. When she told Jacob, his face paled. He was happy but also terrified. They both knew that his parents would never accept the child or Amelia. They had to tell them, though. It was the only way to secure a future for their child. They decided to confront his parents together, hoping that the news of a grandchild might soften their hearts. The day of the confrontation arrived, and Amelia dressed in her best clothes, trying to present herself as well as possible despite her nerves. Jacob led her to his family's grand estate, a sprawling mansion that seemed to loom over the village. As they approached the front door, Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. She clung to Jacob's arm for support, drawing strength from his presence. Inside, they were met by Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, who were surprised to see their son with a young woman they barely recognized. Mr. Whitmore was a tall, imposing man with a sharp gaze that made Amelia feel small and insignificant. Mrs. Whitmore, though beautiful, had an icy demeanor that only added to Amelia's unease. Jacob, with a trembling voice, told his parents about their relationship and Amelia's pregnancy. He spoke of their love and their desire to marry and raise their child together. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then Mr. Whitmore's face turned red with anger. He stood abruptly, his voice booming through the room as he berated Jacob for his foolishness. He called Amelia a gold digger, accusing her of trapping his son with a child that misses. Whitmore, though more composed, was equally cold. She looked at Amelia with disdain and dismissed her as a nobody, unworthy of their family name. They forbade Jacob from seeing Amelia again, insisting that he end the relationship immediately. When Jacob protested, his father made an even more horrifying offer. They would pay Amelia a large sum of money to leave the village, have an abortion, and never return. If she refused, they would ruin her and her grandmother's lives. Amelia was devastated. She could barely hold back her tears as she listened to the cruel words being hurled at her. She knew she couldn't stay in the village if it meant putting her grandmother in danger. She had no choice but to leave, but she couldn't bring herself to kill the child growing inside her. That night, with a heavy heart, Amelia packed her few belongings. She knew she had to leave, but saying goodbye to her grandmother was the hardest part. Nana had always been there for her, and leaving without telling her the truth felt like a betrayal. She stood in the doorway of the small cottage, watching her grandmother doze in her favorite armchair, the knitting needles still in her hands. Then as tears welled up in her eyes, Amelia approached her grandmother and gently shook her awake. Nana looked at her with concern, sensing something was wrong. "What's the matter, dear? Did you and Jacob have a fight?" she asked, her voice full of worry. Amelia nodded, unable to meet her grandmother's eyes. She couldn't bring herself to tell Nana the real reason for her departure. Instead, she simply said, "Yes, Nana, I need to leave for a while. I'm sorry, but I can't explain why." Nana's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't press her further. She reached out and held Amelia's hand, squeezing it gently. "Whatever it is, my dear, remember that I love you. You're a strong girl, just like your mother was. Be safe, and come back to me when you can." Amelia hugged her grandmother tightly, trying to memorize the feeling of her warm embrace. Then, with a heavy heart, she picked up her bag and left the only home she had ever known. As she walked through the village, the moonlight guiding her steps, she couldn't stop the tears from falling. She didn't know where she was going or what the future held, but she knew she had to protect her child, no matter what. Boarding the bus to the city, Amelia felt a sense of loss and fear. She was leaving behind everything she knew and loved, stepping into an uncertain future. As the bus pulled away, she looked back at the village one last time, silently praying for the strength to face whatever lay ahead. Amelia arrived in the bustling city with a heart full of uncertainty and fear. The bright lights and towering buildings overwhelmed her as she stepped off the bus, clutching her small suitcase. The city was nothing like the quiet village she had left behind. It was alive with people, noise, and activity at all hours. She had no plan, no friends, and no idea where to go. All she knew was that she needed to survive, not just for herself, but for the life growing inside her. As she wandered through the unfamiliar streets, exhaustion began to set in. Her feet ached, her stomach growled, and the weight of her situation pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. She found herself in a small park, where she sat on a bench, her hands resting on her slightly swollen belly. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought of her grandmother, her home, and the love she had lost. Just as despair began to overtake her, a kind voice interrupted her thoughts. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile sat down beside her. The woman had been watching Amelia for some time, noticing her distress and exhaustion. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, her voice full of concern. Amelia, who had been trying to hold back her tears, couldn't contain them any longer. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The woman, whose name was Mrs. Havers, gently placed a hand on Amelia's shoulder, offering her comfort. "It's okay, sweetheart. Sometimes life gets too heavy to carry alone." Through her tears, Amelia told Mrs. Havers her story, how she had fled her village to protect her unborn child, how she had nowhere to go, and how she was terrified of what the future might hold. Mrs. Havers listened patiently, her heart going out to this young girl who had clearly been through so much. When Amelia finished, Mrs. Havers offered her a lifeline. "I work as a cook in a large household," she said. "They're looking for a house cleaner, someone who can help out around the house. It's not much, but it's a start. You can stay with me until you get back on your feet." Amelia, overwhelmed by the woman's kindness, gratefully accepted. That night, Mrs. Havers took Amelia to her small apartment, where she gave her a warm meal and a place to sleep. For the first time in days, Amelia felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, Mrs. Havers took Amelia to the grand mansion where she worked. The house belonged to the Westwoods, a wealthy and influential family known throughout the city. Mr. Westwood was a successful businessman, and his wife, Mrs. Westwood, was a socialite who often hosted lavish parties. The mansion was imposing, with its grand pillars, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers, and it was staffed by a small army of servants. Amelia felt nervous as they approached the mansion, her heart racing as she thought about the interview. She didn't know what to expect, but she was determined to do whatever it took to provide for her child. Mrs. Havers reassured her, saying that Mr. Westwood was a fair and kind man, though his wife could be difficult at times. They were greeted at the door by Mr. Westwood himself, a tall man with graying hair and a gentle demeanor. He welcomed them into his office, where he listened to Amelia's story with a thoughtful expression. When she finished, Mr. Westwood looked at her with a mix of sympathy and admiration. "You've been through a lot, young lady," he said. "It takes great courage to face the world on your own, especially in your condition." That he offered her the job on the spot, assuring her that she would be given light duties due to her pregnancy. Amelia was grateful, but she hesitated for a moment, worrying that she wouldn't be able to keep up with the demands of the job as her pregnancy progressed. She expressed her concerns to Mr. Westwood, who smiled kindly and said, "We'll take care of you. You're part of the household now, and we look after our own." With that, Amelia began her new life as a house cleaner in the Westwood mansion. She was given a small but comfortable room in the servants' quarters, and she quickly settled into a routine. Despite the challenges of her pregnancy, Amelia worked hard and earned the respect of the other staff. She found solace in the work, and the Westwood household became a place of refuge for her. That a few weeks into her new job, the household received a visitor, a young woman named Clara. Clara was the surrogate mother carrying Mr. and Mrs. Westwood's child. The Westwoods had struggled for years to have a child of their own, and after many failed attempts, they had turned to surrogacy as their last hope. Clara was close to her due date and had come to stay at the mansion until the baby was born. Clara was a quiet and gentle soul, much like Amelia. The two women quickly formed a bond, sharing their experiences and fears about motherhood. Clara confided in Amelia about the difficulties she had faced as a surrogate, the emotional toll it had taken on her, and the loneliness she felt being away from her own family. Amelia, in turn, shared her own story, and the two women found comfort in each other's company. However, as Clara's due date approached, tensions began to rise in the household. Mrs. Westwood, who had initially been excited about the baby, started to become increasingly irritable and distant. She would often snap at the staff, including Amelia and Clara, for no apparent reason. When Mr. Westwood was home, Mrs. Westwood would put on a happy face, but Amelia noticed the coldness in her eyes whenever she looked at Clara. One evening, after Mr. Westwood had left on a business trip, Amelia overheard a heated argument between Clara and Mrs. Westwood. Mrs. Westwood, in a fit of jealousy and fear, accused Clara of trying to steal her husband and her baby. She threatened Clara, telling her that she would ruin her life if she didn't leave the mansion immediately. Terrified, Clara fled the mansion that very night, leaving behind all her belongings. When Amelia discovered that Clara was gone, she was devastated. She knew that Clara had been forced to leave under duress, and she feared for the well-being of the baby. She immediately informed Mr. Westwood, who was heartbroken and furious when he returned home to find Clara gone. Just as Amelia was grappling with the shock of Clara's departure, her own pregnancy took a sudden turn. One night, she was awakened by intense pain in her abdomen. Panicked, she managed to alert the other staff, and they rushed her to the hospital. However, despite the doctor's best efforts, her baby was stillborn. The grief that overwhelmed Amelia was indescribable. She had lost everything she had been fighting for, and the emptiness in her heart seemed to swallow her whole. As she lay in the hospital bed, unable to hold the child she had carried for so many months, Amelia felt a crushing despair. The doctors and nurses tried to console her, but nothing could ease the pain of losing her baby. She felt as if she had lost her purpose, her reason for enduring all the hardships she had faced. But amid the sorrow, a small glimmer of hope emerged. The nurse who had been caring for Amelia came to her with a special request. There were 3 babies in the hospital nursery who had been abandoned by their mother, and the hospital staff was struggling to care for them. The nurse, seeing Amelia's pain, asked if she would be willing to help by breastfeeding the babies. Amelia, though still grieving, agreed. As she held the first baby in her arms, something in her heart shifted. The act of nurturing the tiny infant brought her a sense of peace and purpose that she had not felt since losing her own child. Over the next few days, Amelia continued to care for the abandoned babies, finding comfort in their presence. Then one day, as she was feeding the babies, Amelia overheard the nurse mention the name of their mother. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the name. It was Clara. The babies she had been caring for were Clara's, the very children that Mr. Westwood had longed for. Realizing the significance of what she had discovered, Amelia immediately contacted Mr. Westwood. When he arrived at the hospital and saw the 3 babies, his heart swelled with love and relief. These were his children, the ones he had feared he would never see. He was overjoyed to be reunited with them, and his gratitude to Amelia was beyond words. However, the joy was bittersweet. When Mr. Westwood asked Amelia about her own child, she broke down in tears and told him that her baby had not survived. Mr. Westwood, deeply moved by her loss and her strength, promised to support her in any way he could. He offered her a new position in the household, not as a house cleaner, but as the nanny to his children. He knew that no one could care for them better than the woman who had saved their lives. Amelia accepted the offer, and as she returned to the Westwood mansion with Mr. Westwood and the babies, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She devoted herself entirely to the care of the children, finding joy in their laughter, their first steps, and their growing personalities. As time passed, Amelia and Mr. Westwood grew closer, bonded by their shared experiences and the love they both had for the children. Mrs. Westwood, however, could not accept the children. Her jealousy and bitterness only grew with time, and eventually she left the mansion, unable to bear the sight of the family that had formed without her. Mr. Westwood, though saddened by his wife's departure, knew that his first responsibility was to his children, and he was determined to give them the best life possible. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia found herself growing closer to Mr. Westwood in ways she hadn't expected. Their shared grief over their losses, coupled with their deep love for the children, forged a bond that went beyond that of employer and employee. Mr. Westwood, who had always been a reserved and dignified man, began to open up to Amelia, revealing his vulnerabilities and fears. Amelia, too, found herself confiding in him more and more. They often sat together in the evenings after the children were asleep, talking about everything from their past to their hopes for the future. These quiet moments were filled with a sense of peace and companionship that neither of them had felt in a long time. Amelia found herself smiling more, laughing at Mr. Westwood's dry humor, and feeling a warmth in her heart whenever she saw him with the children. The children, who were now the center of their lives, had begun to flourish under Amelia's care. The once abandoned infants were now healthy, happy toddlers who filled the mansion with their laughter and energy. Mr. Westwood often marveled at how natural Amelia was with them, how she seemed to intuitively know what each child needed. He couldn't help but admire her strength, her kindness, and the way she had turned his house into a home. As the bond between them deepened, so did their feelings for one another. Mr. Westwood found himself thinking of Amelia constantly, appreciating not just her nurturing spirit, but her inner beauty and resilience. He realized that the admiration he felt for her had grown into something much more profound. He was in love with her. Amelia, too, was grappling with her emotions. She had come to care deeply for Mr. Westwood, not just as the father of the children she adored, but as a man who had shown her kindness and respect. She admired his dedication to his children, his gentle nature, and the way he treated her as an equal. Yet, she was hesitant to acknowledge her feelings, fearing that they were inappropriate or that she was overstepping her boundaries. One evening, as they sat together in the library after the children had gone to bed, Mr. Westwood finally gathered the courage to speak his heart. He looked at Amelia, who was reading quietly beside him, and felt a wave of affection so strong that he couldn't keep silent any longer. "Amelia," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you." Amelia looked up from her book, her heart skipping a beat at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it, Mr. Westwood?" she asked, her voice soft and encouraging that he took a deep breath, his eyes locking with hers. "I've been thinking a lot about the past few months, about everything we've been through together. You came into my life at a time when everything seemed to be falling apart, and you've brought so much light into this house. I've watched you care for these children as if they were your own, and I've seen how you've handled every challenge with grace and strength. I admire you, Amelia, more than I can put into words." Amelia felt her breath catch in her throat. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Westwood, I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "There's more," he said, his voice growing even softer. "I've come to realize that my admiration for you has grown into something much deeper. Amelia, I love you. I've fallen in love with you, and I can't imagine my life without you." Amelia's heart raced as she heard the words she had secretly longed for. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Oh, Mr. Westwood," she said, her voice choked with emotion, I love you too. I've been trying to deny it, to tell myself that it wasn't possible, but the truth is, I've fallen in love with you as well." Mr. Westwood's eyes lit up with joy as he heard her confession. He gently pulled her into his arms, holding her close as they both let their emotions flow freely. It was a moment of pure happiness, a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. With their feelings finally out in the open, the relationship between Amelia and Mr. Westwood blossomed. They were no longer just two people bound by circumstances. They were a couple in love, partners in every sense of the word. The atmosphere in the mansion changed as their love infused the household with warmth and happiness. The children, too, sensed the shift in their relationship. They grew even more attached to Amelia, who had always been a mother figure to them, and they began to look to Mr. Westwood and Amelia as a united front, a loving pair who cared for them deeply. Despite their happiness, Mr. Westwood knew that there was one more step he needed to take. He wanted to make their relationship official, to show Amelia that he was committed to spending the rest of his life with her. He began to plan a proposal that would be as special and meaningful as the woman he loved. A few weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Mr. Westwood invited Amelia to take a walk with him in the garden. The children were playing nearby with their nanny, giving the couple a rare moment alone. The garden was in full bloom, with vibrant flowers and lush greenery surrounding them, creating a beautiful and serene setting. As they strolled through the garden, Mr. Westwood led Amelia to a secluded spot near a fountain, where a small table had been set up with a bouquet of her favorite flowers and a bottle of champagne. Amelia's heart fluttered with anticipation, sensing that something special was about to happen. Mr. Westwood turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. "Amelia," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "these past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what it means to love and be loved, and you've brought so much joy into this household. I can't imagine my future without you by my side." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Amelia gasped softly as he opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "Amelia, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and continue this journey with me as we build a future together with our children?" Tears of joy filled Amelia's eyes as she looked at the man she loved, the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with happiness. "Yes, I will marry you, Mr. Westwood. I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you." Mr. Westwood slipped the ring onto her finger, and then, unable to contain his joy, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her tenderly. It was a kiss filled with love, promise, and the excitement of a future they would build together. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with joy and anticipation. Amelia and Mr. Westwood decided to keep the ceremony intimate, inviting only close friends and family. The mansion, which had once been a place of sorrow and loneliness, was now filled with laughter and happiness as they prepared for the big day. That Amelia's first priority was to visit her grandmother. She and Mr. Westwood made the journey back to her village, where her grandmother welcomed them with open arms. When Amelia introduced Mr. Westwood as her fiancé, her grandmother's eyes filled with tears of joy. She could see the love and respect between the two, and she gave them her blessing with a full heart. Mr. Westwood, deeply touched by the love between Amelia and her grandmother, insisted that the elderly woman come to live with them at the mansion. At first, her grandmother hesitated, not wanting to be a burden, but Mr. Westwood assured her that she would be an honored member of their family. Reluctantly, but gratefully, she agreed, and plans were made for her to move into the mansion after the wedding. The wedding day arrived, and it was everything Amelia had ever dreamed of. The garden was transformed into a magical setting with flowers, twinkling lights, and a gentle breeze that seemed to carry the scent of love and happiness. Amelia walked down the aisle on her grandmother's arm, wearing a simple yet elegant gown that accentuated her natural beauty. Mr. Westwood stood at the altar, his eyes filled with love and admiration as he watched her approach. The ceremony was filled with heartfelt vows, tears of joy, and the presence of the children, who played a special role as flower girls and ring bearers. When Mr. Westwood and Amelia were pronounced husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers, and the couple shared a kiss that sealed their commitment to one another. After the wedding, life in the Westwood mansion settled into a comfortable and joyful routine. Amelia officially became Mrs. Westwood, and she continued to care for the children with the same love and devotion she had always shown. Her grandmother moved into the mansion, where she was surrounded by the warmth and love of her new family. As the years passed, Amelia and Mr. Westwood's love only grew stronger. They faced life's challenges together, always supporting each other and finding joy in the simple pleasures of family life. The children thrived under their care, growing into happy and well-adjusted individuals who knew they were deeply loved. Amelia often reflected on how far she had come, from a young woman running away from a painful past to a wife and mother surrounded by love. She knew that her journey had been filled with hardships, but she also knew that those challenges had led her to the happiness she now cherished. In the end, Amelia and Mr. Westwood found the happily ever after they both deserved. Their home was filled with laughter, love, and the sounds of children playing. And as they grew old together, they knew that their love story was one that had been written by fate, a story that would be told for generations to come. Hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel. Your participation is essential so that we can continue to bring you more incredible stories. Share it with your friends to help our channel grow. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.